But I will start with the fact that they met in January 2005. Years later, on September 25, 2025, Keith Urban stood on a stage in Chicago, performing a song he had originally written for his wife. This time, however, he quietly changed the lyrics and sang another woman's name instead. The moment passed quickly for the audience, but it carried deep meaning. Just 5 days later, divorce papers were filed, ending nearly 19 years of marriage. Their 2 daughters were 17 and 14 at the time. To many fans, this came as a shock, but the truth was that the cracks had started forming long before that night. 4 years, Keith had been living in a separate house, trying to keep his personal life together while continuing to perform, tour, and maintain his public image. What happened was not sudden. It was the result of long struggles, private pain, and pressure that had been building quietly behind the scenes. To understand how everything led to this moment, you have to go back much further, long before the fame, the awards, and the rumors that shook the country music world. Keith Urban was born on October 26, 1967, in Whangarei, New Zealand. His father, Bob Urban, owned a small fabric shop, and his mother, Marianne, came from a Danish background. From her side of the family came an early but unnoticed sign of what was to come. Her grandfather had been a street musician in Copenhagen, someone who lived with music but died with nothing to show for it financially. At the time, no one thought much about that connection. When Keith was just 2 years old, the family moved to Australia and settled in a small town in Queensland called Caboolture. The town had fewer than 8,000 people. There was no country music radio station, no local music scene, and no bands for young musicians to look up to. Music was not a clear or easy path there. In 1971, during long road trips across the Australian outback that could last up to 14 hours, Bob Urban bought his son a small ukulele for $12. The goal was simple. He just wanted to keep his child quiet during the drives. No one could have guessed that this small decision would change the course of Keith's life. 2 years later, when Keith was 6 years old, Bob reluctantly bought him a used Yamaha guitar from a pawn shop in Brisbane for $50. It was meant to be temporary, something Keith would grow out of. Instead, Keith became completely absorbed. He practiced 6 to 8 hours a day without being told to. Within weeks, neighbors started complaining about the constant noise. By the time he was 8, he was breaking 3 sets of guitar strings every month. His fingers became so hard and calloused that his school teacher worried something was wrong and even suspected abuse. That was how intense his dedication had become. To support this obsession, the family made sacrifices. They cut their grocery spending by 30%. Keith's mother took a second job cleaning offices at night. By the time he was 10 years old, Keith had memorized more than 200 country songs. His first guitar teacher, John Edney, charged $3 per lesson but often refused payment because he believed Keith was the most naturally gifted student he had taught in 25 years. From 1975 to 1980, Keith's parents drove him more than 52,000 kilometers across Queensland so he could perform at talent shows and bars. That distance was more than enough to circle the earth once. To save money, the family often slept in their car. In 1978, Keith's mother sold her engagement ring for $180 so he could buy a guitar amplifier. That same year, at just 8 years old, Keith won $25 at the Tamworth Junior Country Music Festival. The money did not go toward toys or fun. It went straight to buying groceries. By age 10, Keith was performing 4 nights every weekend, earning between $15 and $30 per show, which was more than his father was making at the time. He missed 4 to 7 days of school in 1 year alone. The education department threatened legal action, but the performances continued. Eventually, Keith started skipping school altogether to play music on Brisbane's Queen Street Mall. He could earn up to $40 a day just busking. His parents found out when the school called them. His father grounded him for 3 months and took away his guitar. Still, Keith found a way to practice. He used a tennis racket and silently practiced finger movements. Then a local newspaper photographed him busking and ran a story calling him a 10-year-old country prodigy. That single photo helped him land his first real paid gig, earning $75. From that point on, it was clear that music was not just a phase. In 1980, When Keith was 12, he dropped out of Bundaberg High School. His father was furious and deeply worried about his future. By 13, Keith had joined a local band called The Kids and became their lead guitarist. They played rough pubs where grown men drank heavily and shouted from the crowd. Keith earned around $200 a weekend, which would be worth about $600 today. The venues ignored his age because he brought in audiences. He learned how to deal with drunk hecklers before he was even old enough to attend high school dances. At 15, he entered the 1983 Toyota Star Maker Quest in Tamworth. Out of more than 1,200 musicians, Keith won with an original song he wrote alone in his bedroom. The prize was $10,000, which he used to buy his dream guitar, a Sunburst Fender Stratocaster. That win led to a recording deal and bookings at major Australian festivals. A boy from a town with no music scene was suddenly becoming known. At 21, Keith formed a band in Sydney with drummer Peter O'Keefe. They called it Urban, later renamed The Ranch. Between 1988 and 1990, they played more than 300 live shows, performing 6 nights a week. In 1989, they released a self-produced cassette that sold 5,000 copies without any record label support. Fans began to notice songs like Never Coming Down. But things were unstable. In January 1989, after a performance at the Tamworth Festival, a promoter refused to pay Keith $800. An argument broke out, a beer bottle was thrown, and police arrested Keith for public intoxication. His mugshot appeared on the front page of the newspaper with a headline suggesting a rising star had fallen. He spent the night in jail. The incident cost him about $15,000 in cancelled shows and legal fees. To recover, he returned to construction work. He later described this moment as the lowest point of his early career. Despite that setback, EMI Australia signed him in 1990 for $50,000. He recorded his debut album at Studios 301 in Sydney, the same studio used by major bands. The lead single reached number 98 on the charts, but within 8 months, the album sold 35,000 copies and went gold. Keith earned $125,000 in royalties. EMI offered him a 3-album deal worth $200,000, allowing him to leave construction work for good. In 1992, Keith moved to Nashville with only $300. He slept on friends' couches, worked as a session guitarist for $50 an hour, and played open MIC nights at small bars. He faced rejection for 18 months straight. At one point, he was so broke that he left a few clothes at a friend's house just so it felt like he lived somewhere. He described that time as slowly moving without going anywhere. In 1994, he reformed The Ranch with new members and signed with Capitol Records. Their album released in 1997 reached number 34 on the Billboard Country chart. A few songs gained attention, but the band struggled. In 1998, Keith overdosed on cocaine during a show in Dallas and was rushed to rehab. The band collapsed mid-tour, shows were cancelled, and his label nearly dropped him. Addiction had been growing quietly since the mid-1990s, fueled by pressure and fear of failure. Keith later called this the darkest chapter of his life. In 1999, things slowly began to improve. Major artists hired him as a session guitarist, paying well and restoring his reputation. That same year, his solo album was released. In 2001, one song finally changed everything. It reached number 1 and stayed there, selling over 1 million copies. The album went platinum and earned him major awards. In 2002, another album followed, and this one was even bigger. It produced multiple number 1 hits and sold millions of copies. Keith Urban had finally reached the top. But while his career soared, his personal life suffered. During this time, he ended a long and painful relationship with Laura Sigler. They were once engaged, but addiction, cheating rumors, and emotional struggles tore them apart. She later described their relationship as deeply damaging and said his addictive nature made it difficult for him to truly commit. Around the same period, rumors surfaced of a costly legal dispute with a former manager. Even at the height of his success, trouble followed closely behind, quietly shaping the man behind the music. No specific details ever reached the headlines, but people inside the music industry quietly talked about arguments and tension happening behind closed doors. This was all happening at the same time Keith Urban's career was exploding. His album Golden Road went on to sell more than 3.27 million copies across the United States, Canada, and Australia. In Australia alone, it reached platinum status after selling 70,000 copies. In Canada, it went double platinum with 200,000 sales, and in the United States, it reached triple platinum. This level of success pushed Keith into a completely new phase of his career. In 2003, he launched his first major arena tour. This was a huge change from the small clubs and bars he had played for years. Now he was standing on massive stages, performing in front of packed arenas and thousands of fans every night. Somebody Like You became his first gold-certified single, and You'll Think of Me followed closely behind. That song even earned him a Grammy for Best Male Country Vocal Performance, confirming that he had truly arrived at the top of the industry. There was another influence shaping Keith's music long before Golden Road ever existed. Back in 1988, while still in Australia, he attended a John Mellencamp concert during the Lonesome Jubilee tour. Keith later described the experience as being struck by lightning. It was not just admiration. It completely changed how he understood music. He once said that he did not leave the concert thinking he wanted to copy Mellencamp. Instead, he walked away feeling like he finally understood how music could blend storytelling, emotion, and raw energy. From that moment on, Keith began mixing everything he loved about country, rock, and honest songwriting into his own sound. Over the years, he covered Mellencamp songs like Jack and Diane and Hurts So Good. In 2015, the two artists even performed Pink Houses together on national television. That same year, Keith released a song called John Cougar, John Deere, John 3 verse 16, which was a clear tribute to Mellencamp's influence on his life and career. One of the most memorable songs from Golden Road, Raining on Sunday, was not originally written by Keith. It was first written and recorded by Radney Foster in 1998, with background vocals by Darius Rucker. Keith heard the song and immediately connected with it. He told Foster how much he loved the track and decided to record his own version. Keith's version went on to reach number 3 on the country charts. Around this time, he was dealing with serious emotional and mental health struggles. While Keith never officially confirmed that the song was recorded during a depressive episode, the timing lines up with a period when he was battling addiction and recovering from a painful breakup. The song's quiet mood and themes of shelter and searching for peace felt even more powerful knowing what he was going through behind the scenes. In September 2004, Keith released his 4th studio album, Be Here. The album debuted at number 1 on the Billboard Country chart and showed no signs of slowing down. It went on to sell more than 4 million copies, making it the best-selling album of his entire career. The lead single, Days Go By, stayed at number 1 for 4 weeks and even crossed over to reach number 31 on the Billboard Hot 100. The album was certified gold very quickly and reached platinum status within just 6 weeks. Keith co-produced the album with Dan Huff once again and wrote or co-wrote 9 of the 13 tracks. The success brought him major recognition, including 3 Academy of Country Music Awards for Male Vocalist of the Year, Album of the Year, and Producer of the Year. Professionally, everything seemed perfect. But just as his career was reaching new heights, serious trouble appeared in 2005. Keith developed a large nodule on his vocal cords, caused by years of non-stop singing. His doctor described it as similar to a callus forming on his voice. He needed emergency laser surgery in Boston, performed by the same specialist who had operated on John Mayer. After the surgery, Keith was not allowed to speak at all for 3 weeks, not even a whisper. He later admitted that he accidentally spoke a few times during recovery and was terrified by how strange his voice sounded. He became so anxious that he worried about damaging his voice while sleeping and even emailed his surgeon in a panic after dreaming that he was singing on stage. Thankfully, the surgery was successful. When he returned to the stage at the 2005 Grammy Awards to perform Making Memories of Us, he said it felt like something inside him had suddenly been unblocked. Soon after, Tonight I Want to Cry was released and climbed to number 2 on the country chart while also reaching number 36 on the Hot 100. The song went platinum and connected deeply with listeners. In an honest interview, Keith explained that the song came from a very raw place. It was inspired by a breakup in 2003 and the intense emotions he was facing while trying to stay sober. He recalled something his ex-partner said to him that completely crushed him. She told him that the novelty of him had worn off. That single sentence sent him spiraling. He turned back to drinking and drugs, falling heavily into cocaine and ecstasy once again. He later admitted that much of the late 1990s and early 2000s felt like a dark blur. When he was not performing, he felt disconnected and out of place, and drugs became his way of coping with the pressure of Nashville and the music industry. Despite all of this, 2005 was also a milestone year. Keith received his first nomination for CMA Entertainer of the Year and won on his very first attempt. That same year, You'll Think of Me won him another Grammy. There were also rumors that he worked on early demo sessions for Carrie Underwood's Jesus, Take the Wheel, though nothing was ever officially confirmed. What is confirmed is that Be Here produced 5 top 5 singles, including 3 #1 hits. His tour for the album earned over $20 million from just 39 shows, placing him in Billboard's top 25 tours for the first time in 2006. As his success continued to grow, his personal struggles returned once again. After marrying Nicole Kidman in June 2006, Keith relapsed during a European tour. The situation became so serious that Nicole had to organize an intervention. Keith later admitted that he caused the near collapse of his new marriage and said it was a miracle it survived. The pressure of massive success combined with being married to a global movie star pushed him beyond his limits. He openly acknowledged that recovery requires constant vigilance and that he had let his guard down. His next album, Love, Pain, and the Whole Crazy Thing, was released in November 2006 and debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200. It sold over 1 million copies, and the hit single Stupid Boy later won him a Grammy in 2008. However, the album was recorded during one of the most difficult periods of his life. While Nicole was away filming in Rome, Keith relapsed again while alone in their Nashville home. When Nicole returned on October 19, 2006, she found drugs in the house and immediately staged an intervention. Keith entered the Betty Ford Center that same day, canceling performances and promotional plans for the album. One of the standout songs from the album, I Told You So, reached #2 on the country chart in 2007. Keith later admitted he wrote it during a painful and chaotic moment in his marriage. The album itself pushed musical boundaries, blending country with rock and using unusual instruments rarely heard on country radio. The creative process was intense and often explosive. During rehearsals for the 2007 tour, Keith fired his entire band after heated arguments over musical direction, only to rehire musicians quickly to keep the tour from collapsing. That same period produced Once in a Lifetime, which debuted at #17, the highest debut ever for a country single at that time, though it peaked at #6. Keith later revealed he wrote the song for Nicole when she was unsure about marrying him. She once told him it felt like a long shot, and those words stayed with him. Another single, Everybody, followed and reached #4. It was deeply personal and served as a thank you to Nicole and everyone who supported him through recovery. For the first time, Nicole joined him on tour, and the 2008 tour, with Carrie Underwood as the opening act, became one of the highest-grossing country tours of the year. Keith Urban later released his 8th studio album on September 10, 2013, continuing a career shaped equally by immense success and deeply personal struggle. The release did more than surprise fans. It divided the country music world right down the middle. Fuse shot straight to #1 on the Billboard country charts and reached platinum status within just a few months. But the real shock was not how well it sold. It was how it sounded. The lead single, Cop Car, barely sounded like traditional country music at all. It featured electronic beats, EDM-style drops, and production touches from Rick Rubin, the legendary producer known for working with artists like Jay-Z and the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Traditional country fans reacted immediately and loudly, accusing Urban of abandoning the genre. What most people did not know was that the version released to the public was actually a toned-down version. Keith had recorded even more experimental tracks that never made it onto the album. He was not trying to fit in anymore. He was intentionally pushing boundaries and breaking expectations. The controversy only grew the following year. In 2014, Keith collaborated with rising country star Kelsea Ballerini on Raise 'Em Up. The song reached number 1, but the success was quickly overshadowed by rumors. That summer, an Australian magazine published photos of Ballerini leaving Keith's tour bus, smiling and relaxed. She was only the opening act, but tabloids did not hesitate to suggest something inappropriate was happening. Stories spread claiming she was spending late nights around his trailer and acting unusually close to him. At the same time, rumors surfaced that Nicole Kidman was feeling uneasy. Jealousy had quietly followed their marriage for years, but now it was out in the open. Both Keith and Kelsea strongly denied the rumors, but the damage was done. His name became part of gossip cycles that refused to disappear, and the timing could not have been worse. In 2016, Keith released Ripcord, and it became his biggest commercial success to date. The album debuted at number 1, went platinum, and showcased bold new ideas. Break on Me was recorded using acoustic loops in his Nashville home studio, giving it a personal and intimate sound while still becoming a major hit. Wasted Time won CMA Single of the Year, and the live performances introduced something completely new to country music. Nathan Barlow brought a custom-built device called the Phantom on stage, made with 4 iPads and a mixing board that triggered studio samples live during performances. For country audiences, this level of technology was unheard of. Fans were not just hearing songs anymore, they were experiencing the studio sound recreated live in real time. Keith was no longer just making music. He was changing how it was delivered. Behind the technology and awards, however, tension was growing. Just before the Ripcord World Tour began, Keith fired his longtime drummer during rehearsals. The decision came down to disagreements over tempo and precision. Those close to the band were not shocked. Keith was known for demanding perfection. He wanted musicians who could not only play their instruments but also manage samples, keyboards, and technology at the same time. That was why Nathan Barlow became so important to the setup. The Oceania leg of the tour, co-headlined with Carrie Underwood, earned over $5.7 million from just 6 shows in Australia. Worldwide, the tour brought in $33.6 million and drew more than 600,000 fans. But behind those numbers were exhausting rehearsals, constant pressure, and band turnover driven by Keith's intense standards. In 2017, Keith and Carrie Underwood released The Fighter, which quickly reached number 1. The story behind the song was deeply personal. Keith wrote it with songwriter Busby in London, and later shared that the lyrics were inspired by the early days of his marriage to Nicole Kidman. It was also about their daughter Faith Margaret, who was born via surrogate in 2010. The song was meant to reflect protection, loyalty, and standing by the people you love. To record Carrie's vocals, Busby rearranged Keith's entire video shoot schedule because she only had one free day in St. Louis. The song became triple platinum in the United States and quadruple platinum in Australia. Sadly, Busby passed away from brain cancer in 2019, making The Fighter one of his final major contributions. Over time, the song became more than a hit. It became a lasting memory. Keith's next album, Graffiti You, was released on April 27, 2018. It debuted at number 1 on the country albums chart, but the momentum faded quickly. First week sales were strong, but by the second week, the album dropped sharply on the Billboard 200. The lead single, Female, inspired by the Me Too movement, stalled outside the top 10, breaking a streak Keith had maintained for nearly 2 decades. Never Coming Down also struggled to gain traction. Critics were harsh. Some said Keith seemed unsure of his direction, and by mid-2019, the album barely reached gold status. It became his weakest commercial performance in over 10 years. At the same time, problems were growing at home. In interviews, Keith hinted at tension caused by Nicole's demanding filming schedule, particularly during Big Little Lies. Friends later confirmed the couple had been living apart since mid-2018. Keith moved into a separate home. The lyrics in Never Coming Down were no longer just metaphorical. They reflected real emotional distance in his marriage. When Nicole eventually filed for divorce on September 30, 2025, the legal paperwork pointed to problems that had begun during this exact period. Then came 2020, when the world shut down. Keith recorded an entire album from home during the pandemic. The Speed of Now Part 1 was released in September and still managed to reach number 1 on the country charts. God Whispered Your Name peaked at number 3 and earned a Grammy nomination. Keith worked remotely with musicians, streaming performances, and participating in global charity events. His cover of Higher Love gained attention, and the album won top honors at the Queensland Music Awards. But the success came at a heavy cost. His tour was cancelled, resulting in losses estimated at $10 million. Ticket sales, production costs, and deposits vanished overnight. Keith quietly returned to online recovery meetings, trying to stay grounded. His touring operation had to be rebuilt from scratch using drive-in concerts and virtual shows just to survive. In 2021, his collaboration with Post Malone changed things again. One Too Many reached number 1 and passed 1 billion streams on Spotify by 2023. Keith later admitted he did not join the project out of ambition, but loneliness. Isolated at home, facing creative blocks and rising personal tension, he needed connection. The song was recorded virtually, with Malone in Los Angeles and Keith in Nashville. They never met in person. The lyrics about drinking alone and emotional strain felt uncomfortably close to Keith's real life. The success reignited criticism from country fans who felt he was drifting too far from his roots. While his team pushed for more crossover collaborations, Keith hesitated. He already knew how much those choices could cost. In September 2024, Keith released High. It debuted at number 14 on the country charts. Messed Up As Me reached number 1 and gained over 500 million streams. The album included 12 tracks, featuring a duet with Lainey Wilson. Several songs came from a scrapped project, while others were upbeat tracks Keith described as carefree and energetic. Critics praised it as his most personal and varied work in years. But behind the scenes, his marriage was falling apart. Nicole filed for divorce on September 30, 2025, after years of trying to save the relationship. They had celebrated their anniversary in June, but by September, it was over. They had been married for nearly 19 years. Their daughters were 17 and 14, and Nicole received custody. Keith continued touring. The High and Alive World Tour launched just 5 days before the divorce filing, opening at the United Center in Chicago. He played for 90 minutes, mixing old hits with new songs. Industry insiders predicted the tour could earn $60 million. But fans noticed something unusual. During The Fighter, a song once written for Nicole, Keith changed the lyrics and sang the name Maggie instead. Maggie was his 25-year-old guitarist. The moment spread quickly online. Maggie posted the clip with eye emojis, and her father dismissed the rumors, saying it was just music. Still, she skipped the next show, and Keith removed the song from the setlist. Despite everything, Keith kept moving forward. In October 2025, he spoke on a Nashville radio show about his 14 years of sobriety and how his daughters kept him grounded. He reflected on the intervention Nicole and his friends staged in 2006, just after their wedding, and said it saved his life. Through every rise and collapse, music remained the one thing that continued to steady him when everything else fell apart.